What if the earliest chapters of Genesis aren't describing this messy construction site, but actually, the aftermath of a catastrophic cosmic war?
Right, which sounds like sci-fi, but it's grounded in the text.
Exactly. And what if proving it requires abandoning basically everything you thought you knew about the speed of light?
Yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around.
It really is. So, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are sitting right at the collision point of ancient biblical theology and modern quantum physics.
And it is a wild ride.
Oh, absolutely. We're exploring the incredibly mysterious early verses of Genesis, and we're looking at this fascinating array of materials.
Yeah, sources that blend deep linguistic analysis of ancient Hebrew with some seriously mind-bending scientific theories about light, time, and, the age of the Earth itself.
And the goal today isn't to tell you what to believe. Whether you're a theology buff, a physics nerd, or just wildly curious, our mission is just to impartially unpack these sources.
Right. We want to look at how ancient texts and modern science might actually be engaged in this deeply complex dialogue.
Yeah, because often what we assume are glaring contradictions are really just, well, false paradoxes.
Exactly. Things born out of mistranslations, or just a fundamental misunderstanding of the physics.
Right, so we're covering everything from a theological conjecture known as the gap theory, all the way to testimonies from 50 modern PhD scientists who advocate for a literal six-day creation.
It's a huge spectrum of thought.
It is, and I promise you, by the end of this deep dive, you are never going to look at a sunset or even just a beam of light from a flashlight the exact same way again.
I definitely don't.
Right. So let's get into it. Before we can even understand the creation of the world, linguistic scholars insist we have to understand the grammar of the very first sentences ever written about it.
Yeah, Genesis 1.1 and 1.2.
Right.
So Genesis 1.1 is that foundational statement most people already know. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Period.
Right, nice and simple.
But the mystery starts immediately in the very next sentence.
Yeah.
Genesis 1.2 traditionally reads, "And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep."
Which sounds poetic, but...
But Hebrew scholars argue that this standard translation might actually be masking a massive historical event. And it's all due to how we translate one single Hebrew verb, which is haya.
Right, because in the standard English text, it's just translated as was.
Yeah.
But structurally, because of the specific word order in the Hebrew, linguists point out that it functions as an action that has already happened.
Exactly, a pluperfect.
Right, meaning it shouldn't be translated as was, but rather had become.
And that changes literally everything.
It really does.
For a vivid example of how this specific word works, you can look elsewhere in Genesis at the story of Lot's wife.
Oh, right, the pillar of salt.
Yeah. When she looks back at the destruction of Sodom, the text uses that exact same verb, saying she became a pillar of salt. It implies a transition, a catastrophic change. She wasn't built from the ground up as a pillar of salt.
Right, a disaster occurred to her.
Exactly.
That is a vital distinction. It completely flips the tone of the verse.
It does. And then you have the next phrase describing the earth, which is puhu wabohu.
Which is usually translated as without form and void.
Right. But those words carry this really heavy connotation of being confused, ruined, or just empty.
So it's the difference between walking into a room and saying, the room was a mess, versus saying, but the room had become a mess.
That's a great way to put it.
Because one implies the contractor just built it poorly and left it unfinished, but the other implies something terrible happened after it was perfectly built.
Exactly. And the Septuagint translation backs up that specific interpretation beautifully.
Okay, remind us what the Septuagint is again.
So, about 300 years before the time of Christ, the Jewish world largely spoke Greek, not Hebrew. So down in Alexandria, Egypt, 70 top scholars were brought together to translate the Hebrew scriptures into Greek.
And ancient Greek is an incredibly precise language structurally, especially compared to ancient Hebrew, so their word choices carry a lot of weight.
A ton of weight. And those 70 scholars, dealing with this highly precise language, they didn't translate the opening word of verse 2 as and.
Because and implies a smooth continuation.
Right. Instead, they translated it as but, which implies a sudden change or a contrast.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you put all these linguistic clues together, the revelation is staggering. The text might actually read, "But the earth had become without form and void."
Which raises an immediate, massive question for anyone reading it.
Oh, for sure.
If God created the heavens and the earth perfectly in verse 1, and by verse 2 it had become a ruined, dark wasteland, What on earth caused the disaster?
Right. And this leads us straight into a controversial but historically significant theological conjecture known as the gap theory.
The gap theory.
Yeah, championed by 19th and 20th century scholars like Thomas Chalmers. It posits that there is this mysterious, perhaps vast gap of time between the initial creation in Genesis 1.1 and the ruined state of the earth in 1.2.
So the core argument is that God didn't initially create a messy, dark, chaotic universe.
Exactly.
And the prophets actually seem to support this reading.
They do.
Yeah.
Take Isaiah 45.18, where God explicitly says he did not create the earth in vain.
The Hebrew word used there for in vain is tohu, the exact same word used in Genesis 1.2 for without form.
Precisely. You also have the prophet Jeremiah. In Jeremiah chapter 4, he has this wild vision where he says, I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void. Again, kohu wabohu.
But look at his description of it.
Yeah, he sees ruined cities, trembling mountains, no man, no birds, and the heavens having no light.
It reads like the aftermath of a fierce, catastrophic judgment.
Right, not a fresh construction site waiting for its first coat of paint.
And the vocabulary of Genesis 1.2 gets even spookier when you look closely at the darkness.
Oh, yeah.
Because the text says, darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Hebrew word for darkness there is choshek.
Which is important.
Yeah, the linguistic notes point out this isn't just the regular absence of light like a normal nighttime. It implies an unnatural thick darkness.
It's actually the same word used for the plague of darkness in Egypt, the one that was so thick it could literally be felt by the people.
And then there's the deep.
Right. The Hebrew word is tehom. When those 70 scholars translated it into Greek, it became abusos, the abyss.
The abyss.
Yeah. And in ancient texts, this is a realm heavily associated with evil spirits, demons, and chaotic destruction.
So you have a formerly perfect earth, now ruined, covered in an unnatural, plague-like darkness, and submerged in the abyss.
That's a terrifying picture.
It really is. Okay, but here's where I have to offer some pushback on behalf of the listener.
Sure.
Because whenever I hear about the gap theory, it just sounds like a convenient theological loophole.
How do you mean?
Like a quick way for modern readers to explain away the dinosaurs, Like, let's just fit billions of years of geological time between two Bible verses so we don't sound anti-science.
That is definitely the most common modern assumption. But the theological texts we're looking at strictly reject that application.
Really?
Yeah. Even if you accept the gap theory, it doesn't solve the dinosaur issue for you at all. According to these traditional frameworks, dinosaurs existed alongside Adam.
Oh, wow.
Meaning they lived and died after the events of the creation week. This theoretical gap between verses 1 and 2 isn't about fitting in geological eras.
It's entirely about a massive cosmic conflict.
Exactly.
Okay, a cosmic conflict. If the Earth became a ruin in this gap, who was the culprit? Who caused this catastrophe?
Well, the texts point toward the original tenet of this ancient pre-Adamic world, the fall of the anointed cherub.
To set the stage for that, we have to look at the book of Job, chapter 38.
Right. God asks Job where he was when the foundations of the earth were laid. And he mentions that the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy.
And in ancient Hebrew, sons of God specifically refers to angels.
Yeah, so the angels were basically cheering in the cosmic bleachers when the earth was first created in Genesis 1.1.
They witnessed it happening.
But by Genesis chapter 3, a fallen entity, Satan, is already present in the Garden of Eden.
Right, and the text doesn't explicitly state the timing of his fall in Genesis.
No, but theologians pull heavily from prophecies in Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14 to detail his origin and his rebellion.
We should probably explain the rhetorical technique happening in those prophetic books because it can be super confusing.
It really can.
The prophet is initially told to speak to an earthly king like the king of Tyre or Babylon, but the language rapidly shifts.
Yeah, it becomes obvious they are no longer speaking to a human, but to the spiritual power, the entity operating behind that earthly king.
The text in Ezekiel proves that shift, right? It says, "Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God."
Clearly, the literal human king of Tyre was never in Eden.
Exactly. And it describes this being not as some ugly red monster with a pitchfork, but as the epitome of wisdom, perfect in beauty.
He is described as the anointed cherub that covereth, meaning he was this top-tier angelic being, and he was covered in precious stones.
Those stones are fascinating. Sardius, topaz, diamonds, sapphire. They essentially represent refracted colored light.
Right, he was a being clothed in light.
And he even had musical instruments, tabrets, and pipes built into his very creation.
He was a perfect musical being of light. until, as Ezekiel says, iniquity was found in thee.
And then Isaiah 14 outlines his fall.
Yeah, this being, called Lucifer, the son of the morning, fell through what theologians call the 5 I wills.
He became filled with pride because of his beauty and ambition.
Exactly. He said, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will be like the Most High.
So the conjecture here is that this original perfect earth from Genesis 1.1 might actually have been this cherub's domain, his earthly throne.
And when he rebelled against the Most High, it resulted in a cataclysmic judgment against him and his territory.
A judgment that left his domain tohu wabohu, ruined, empty, and submerged in that unnatural darkness of Genesis 1.2.
And it may have sat in that ruined state for an unknown amount of time.
So Genesis 1.2 isn't a messy construction site. It's the scene of a cosmic crime.
That's one way to look at it, yeah.
And God is hovering over the waters, preparing to renovate a destroyed universe. And to begin this ultimate renovation, his very first command is, let there be light.
Right.
But to really grasp the magnitude of that command piercing the void, we have to understand what light actually is.
Which is surprisingly difficult.
Yeah, because modern quantum physics tells us that light is just as mysterious as this ancient text implies.
Oh, absolutely.
Mhm.
To this day, light remains one of the most profound paradoxes in science.
Yeah.
Back in the 19th century, this polymath named Thomas Young conducted the famous two-slit experiment, and it completely shattered how we view reality.
So if you shine a light through a single slit in a barrier, it hits the wall behind it like a clustered point, tapering off at the edges.
Right, just like you'd expect if you were firing tiny particles or tennis balls through a crack in a fence.
But if you cut a second slit next to it and open them both, you don't just get 2 clusters of tennis balls.
No, you get an interference pattern on the back wall.
Let's explain how that works because it's crucial for the listener.
Sure. Think of dropping 2 pebbles into a pond. They both create ripples that spread outward.
Okay.
When those waves of water pass through 2 openings, they ripple out and crash into each other. Where the crests of 2 waves meet, the wave gets bigger.
Right.
But where a crest meets a trough, they cancel each other out, leaving flat water.
And when light passes through 2 slits, it does exactly this, creating a striped pattern of bright light and dark bands on the wall.
Mathematically, it proves that light behaves exactly like a wave, interfering with itself.
But here's the crazy part. If you place a detector at the slits to measure which one the light goes through, the light somehow knows it's being watched.
It's wild.
The interference pattern disappears entirely, and it goes back to acting like a particle.
It literally acts differently depending on whether or not we are observing it.
It behaves like a physical tennis ball when you measure it, but like a rippling wave when you don't.
It is deeply counterintuitive,
Yeah.
and the physics gets even more complex in the 20th century.
Right, with Max Planck.
Yeah. He was studying energy and realized his math only worked if energy wasn't a continuous, smooth flow, but rather came in tiny, discrete, digital bundles.
He called this quantization.
Exactly.
Think of it like a piano. You can hit a C key, or you can hit a C-sharp key, but you cannot play a note in between those 2 keys.
The energy simply doesn't exist in the spaces between. It's quantized.
And Albert Einstein built on Planck's math to explain that light itself is quantized into bundles we now call photons.
So light is somehow, impossibly, both a particle and a wave.
Wave-particle duality. There's actually an amazing piece of scientific irony here in the sources.
Oh, yeah.
J.J. Thomson won a Nobel Prize in 1906 for proving that electrons are particles. Decades later, his own son won a Nobel Prize for proving that electrons are waves.
And they're both right, because energy, mass, length, and time itself seem to be quantized.
They operate in discrete steps, almost like the digital pixels on a screen rather than a smooth, continuous analog painting.
Which brings us to another massive scientific assumption that directly impacts our reading of Genesis.
And that is the speed of light.
Right.
But wait, hold on. The speed of light is the absolute bedrock constant of modern physics. It's the c in EMC squared.
It is.
We use it to measure time, distance, literally everything. You can't just say it's changing. How on earth did these 50 scientists advocating for a 6-day creation justify challenging something that fundamental?
Well, it sounds like heresy to classical physics, but they point to raw data.
Researchers like Barry Setterfield and Trevor Norman went back and analyzed over 300 years of speed of light measurements.
Like historical data.
Yeah, they looked at Romer's early eclipse measurements in the 1600s, Harvard's tests in 1875, all the way up to modern laser measurements. And they found a statistically startling trend.
which was?
The speed of light appears to be slowing down.
So it's not a constant.
They argue it follows a decay curve, meaning if it is slowing down now, it was traveling significantly faster in the past.
Much faster in the days of Abraham, and potentially millions of times faster at the dawn of creation.
Exactly. And astronomer William Tiff's observations regarding the redshift of stars actually support this.
Let's unpack the redshift.
Usually when starlight is shifted toward the red end of the spectrum, astronomers assume it's because the star is moving rapidly away from us.
Right. This is the foundational proof for an expanding universe.
But Tiff discovered the redshift doesn't happen on a smooth sliding scale. It happens in discrete jumps.
Just like our piano keys analogy, the light frequency hits one key, then immediately jumps to the next with nothing in between.
Right, the redshift is digital, it's quantized.
This leads some scientists to argue that the redshift might not actually be evidence of stars speeding away from us.
No, instead, it might be evidence of the changing speed of light impacting atomic frequencies in discrete quantum steps.
We have to unpack why this matters for the listener. How does the speed of light dropping change the age of the Earth?
It comes down to atomic frequencies.
Right. If the speed of light is factored into the equation for how an atom operates and decays, and light used to be millions of times faster, then atomic clocks were ticking millions of times faster back then too.
Exactly. A rock that looks 4 billion years old, based on today's slow, constant radioactive decay rates, might have actually aged that much in a tiny fraction of the time.
So it provides a mathematical framework where radioactive dating is heavily skewed by a changing constant.
Yeah, our atomic clocks are slowly falling out of sync with our orbital clocks, the physical movement of the planets.
If the foundational parameter of physics, the speed of light, was vastly different during the creation week, then applying our modern measurements to the physics of Genesis 1 is like, well, trying to measure the volume of a liquid with a standard tape measure.
The math simply might not apply to the physics of that moment.
Time itself wasn't operating under the same physics engine.
Right.
But even so, how do we understand the biblical counting of that time? Because Genesis repeatedly uses the phrase, and the evening and the morning were the first day.
Yeah.
Why evening to morning? Why not morning to evening, which feels a lot more natural for a day's work?
This is where the theology and the physics beautifully crash into each other one last time.
I love this part.
To answer that, we have to look at the linguistic roots of those specific Hebrew words. Erev for evening and Boker for morning.
Let's look at Erev first. The root of the word carries the meaning of obscuration, mixture, or a lack of discernible form.
And in modern scientific terms, a physicist would call this entropy.
Entropy.
Yeah. Entropy is the universal law that everything in a closed system naturally moves from order to disorder.
The law of entropy is basically why my garage is a constant disaster.
Right, exactly.
If I spend all of Saturday organizing it, giving it energy and information to establish order, I can guarantee that within a month, it will naturally devolve back into chaos.
Things break, dust settles, tools get mixed up.
Yeah. That natural decay into disorder, into mixture and obscurity that is Erev.
Conversely, consider the root for Boker morning. It means becoming discernible, visible, the relief of obscurity.
It is the active establishment of order, the injection of design and information into a system.
It is the exact opposite of entropy.
So when the text says from evening to morning, it isn't just talking about a literal sunset and sunrise.
No, it is describing a universe actively moving from a state of chaotic entropy, Erev, to a state of profound order and design, Boker.
It perfectly describes what God is doing in the narrative.
Right, the first 6 days all feature this phrase as God actively organizes the cosmos, pulling it out of the ruin to huwa bohu.
And fascinatingly, the seventh day, the day God rests, completely lacks the phrase evening and morning.
Because the restorative ordering work was finished.
Every single day in Genesis is a literal victory lap over chaos. It's the ultimate divine reversal of the universal law of entropy.
It's a remarkable synthesis of concepts.
It really is.
When you take the time to look closely at both the original nuances of ancient languages and the bleeding edge of quantum physics, you find they are engaged in a highly complex dialogue.
You don't have to check your brain at the door to read ancient texts, and you absolutely don't have to abandon a sense of awe and wonder to study science. So let's take a breath and look at the incredible journey we've just been on.
We've covered a lot.
We really have. We started with a single verb translation in Genesis 1.2. That clue led us to uncover the gap theory, a potential ancient cosmic war involving a perfect musical cherub of light whose pride ruined a pre-Adamic universe.
Yeah.
We watched the spirit of God hover over that unnatural darkness, and we heard the command, "Let there be light."
We unpacked how the two-slit experiment proves that light is an impossible wave-particle paradox.
Right. We challenged the absolute constant of the speed of light, showing how a decaying speed could entirely upend radioactive dating.
And finally, we saw how the ancient Hebrew words for evening and morning perfectly describe the ultimate scientific fight against entropy.
The parallels are profound.
They really are.
But before we go, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over on your own.
Oh, this is a good one.
When quantum physicists study photons, those tiny quantized bundles of light, they observe a phenomenon called non-locality.
Right.
In simple terms, it means a particle of light instantly knows what an entangled particle of light on the exact opposite side of the universe is doing.
It defies the constraints of space and distance.
Yeah, mimicking the very theological concept of omnipresence. If light itself is fundamentally aware and connected across the entire cosmos, what does that say about the mind of the one who first stood in the dark and said, "Let there be light"?
That's incredible to think about.
It really is. Think about that the next time you turn on a lamp or watch a sunset. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep reading, and keep exploring.
Thanks for joining us on this hour on the Archive Hour. Join us on our next hour as we bring you more adventures from the Bible.